Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are titling this one, Understanding and Managing Hunger During Fasting. So, this is one of the biggest things that we hear from listeners. What's going on with my hunger? Why am I so hungry? What is hunger? What should I do about it? You give in to those urges and temptations, and you set your timer, and then you find yourself eating lunch when you were supposed to fast, and the late night snacks. And so hunger is one of these things that this is going to be just a comprehensive conversation around what hunger is, and then ultimately what are the strategies that you can do and the personalization and the customization with hunger to give you solid frameworks and action steps to work from so you don't get stuck in the ultimate hunger trap. The good news is the more consistent you adopt the fasting lifestyle, and the research shows this as well, the hunger cues and the hunger cravings and all of that stuff ultimately go down, and it becomes easier and easier the more consistent you are. So we're going to talk through that today. So Tommy, excited. If you're new to the podcast, welcome in. Thanks for giving us a shot. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you find a new home with us here at Fasting for Life and you join us on this fasting lifestyle journey. If you want to know more about our stories and why we do what we do with the weekly episodes and the challenges and the coaching and the resources, head back to episode 0, episode 1, give it a listen. It'll give you more insights into who we are and why we do what we do. If you are a long-term listener, thank you so much for joining us once again on this week's episode. I want to give a shout out here, Tommy, to Buzz123 exclamation point. Left us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. So give you a shout out. The title is Thank You with a Heart. Love your podcast. Multiple exclamation points. Listen to it every night. Listen to your new podcast or spend rest of the time catching up. Yes, we have lots now. Love the aha moments, which help me refine my lifestyle. Consistently 5-star. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for listening in, and thank you for taking the time to give us one of our most favorite types of reviews.
Right.
The 5-star kind.
Absolutely. And keep checking in with us too. Let us know how you're doing and how the episodes are inspiring you and which way you go and how your results start to or continue to unfold for you. Buzz123, thank you again so much.
Yeah, so let's talk about hunger time. Let's get into it.
Okay.
The goal of today is really hunger is a friend more than a foe. So hunger is a friend.
That's a good way to think about it.
Hunger is your pal on this journey. I remember when I initially lost all the weight back in the day, and it was like 48.5 pounds in 50 days. Now, I did not keep that off initially. I regained about 22 to 25 pounds, then lost that, and then regained 12 to 15 of that when I had the surgery, and then re-lost that, and I'll spare you all the details of the story. So it's not like a one-time thing, and everything was fixed.
Right.
But I remember walking into the clinic back in the day when I was still in private practice, and I saw a woman who I had seen at CrossFit over the years, and this is when I was heavy into doing the CrossFit workouts and CrossFit competitions and the Open every year and all that. And I hadn't seen her in a while, and I walked in, she goes, "Wow, you look amazing. What have you been doing?" And I was like, "Well, I've been fasting." And she was like, "Oh, God, that sounds horrible." Huh? Yeah. Like, I wouldn't want to do that. I'd be hungry all the time and like instantly shut down. I was like, okay. Or you could have results, but that's cool. It's not for you. Totally fine. But that fear around hunger, it's not a foe. It's a friend. Normalizing, the whole goal of today is to normalize hunger as a trainable physiological response rather than a barrier to your ultimate consistency and success.
Yeah, I feel like it's hunger is probably the main subconscious or maybe conscious reason why most of us don't intuitively try fasting earlier than we initially did. Why it had to reach some sort of desperation point with the diet roller coaster for most of us to even try to see ourselves going like, well, absolutely nothing else is working. I've tried it 1,000 times. I'm doing it now. It's sticking to everything and it's not working. So let me try this fasting thing, even though it sounds crazy, even though it sounds like I'm going to be starving out of my mind, and I'm scared of that feeling because back when when you're feeding the beast 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, you're always kind of chasing that blood sugar roller coaster. The next food bolus, the next blood sugar spike is coming in, and it's going to help kind of squash that hunger. But during those times, usually peak hunger might happen 3 hours after you've eaten. It might be two for some people, it might be 4 or 5. But either way, when you reach that peak hunger, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so hungry. Now I really need to eat something. And at the same time, you could have these just pounds and pounds and pounds of excess fat stored on your frame. So that feels weird, but you're still hungry in a way that it feels like I have to eat. Absolutely. Because if this feeling keeps mounting, it will consume me.
Right.
It feels like, just death by hunger at that point. So I can't even see myself going any further. And that might be only at 5 or 6 hours. So how would I ever see myself going, what are you talking about? 18 hours? 36
24
hours?
hours.
You're out of your mind because you're talking about tripling, quadrupling my hunger. And that's impossible.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So let's set the frame here on like the biology of hunger. Like, what is the body's signal system? And then we can talk about how to interpret it and then give you strategies on how to mitigate it. So in today's world, with the rise of the GLP-1 agonists, right, the mimetics that are out there, semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, all these different ones. I mean, these are their claim to fame being used off-label because they are designed for diabetics, right? Their main mechanism is promoting weight loss by strongly suppressing appetite. So it's clear that hunger plays a significant role in our ability to regulate weight and overall health and long-term goals. While that's intuitive, it's anything but simple because hunger is a sensation, a survival mechanism driven by a complex and finely tuned web of physical, neurological, and hormonal signals, all influenced by what, and how much you eat, your body fat you were just talking about, your physical activity, sleep, stress, and more. Although there's a need for energy, and it's the primary driver of hunger, not all food choices regulate hunger in the same way when you take into account sleep and stress and body fat percentage. So we have this kind of complex signaling system that we're trying to interpret in a real-time moment when willpower might be lacking and an opportunity like a taco truck or a donuts in the break room at the office, or the opportunity to go to happy hour with a friend, or the birthday party that pops up on your schedule on the weekend.
Yeah.
So the reality is hunger isn't just willpower. It's a hormonal communication chain between your gut, your brain, and your metabolism. And there's two main players. There's ghrelin, which is the hunger trigger, and there's leptin, which is the fullness signal. So ghrelin rises before meals and falls once you eat. So, however, though, with a fasting adaptation, with consistent fast cycling or consistent intermittent fasting and sprinkling in the extended fast, you'll see ghrelin levels, the peaks of that growling hunger trigger, reduce over time as the body anticipates the eating window. And with leptin, this is the signal that tells your brain when you've had enough. So here's what happens. Chronically overeating, poor food choices, sleep, and stress that's not being managed well will cause what we call leptin resistance, just like insulin resistance. And we did an episode on this recently with a high hedonic meal, high fat, high carb meal, processed food. The lag effect, because leptin then goes and tells the brain, hey, I'm full. Like, don't eat. The problem is if you're carrying all this excess weight and your stress is out of control and your sleep isn't great and you're trying fasting, and some folks don't have a hey, I'm full signal. Leptin is being blocked, or it's your body's resisting it because of the chronic elevated amount, just like insulin resistance, that's been floating around in your bloodstream. So think of hunger as a wave instead of a wall. Because ghrelin and leptin come in cycles, mostly ghrelin, based on it's a mechanistic response to your stomach being empty, right? So it's high when it's empty and it's low after you fill the gut. So think of hunger. Let's reframe it first and foremost, talking about the body's signaling system. Think of hunger as a wave, right? So you can ride it out instead of a wall.
Riding out the wave. Yeah, I like that as a good way to think about it. When you say it like that, it also reminds me that when your electrolyte levels get low, it also prolongs those waves too. So during times of dehydration and low electrolytes, so this might be when you first wake up in the morning, you're at your most dehydrated state because typically you haven't had much to drink or any salt sources over the past 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, depending on when you normally stop intaking those things before you go to bed. And then so that compounds the ghrelin effect. It compounds the growling and the physical hunger pangs that come along with that. So if maybe first thing in the morning you feel those hunger cues, then that's a good reminder to have deliberate salt supplementation, deliberate rehydration during those times. But anytime during the day when you're feeling those ways, then take that as a good reminder that it's time to rehydrate. It's time to make sure you have your salt supplementation, and that's a good way to kind of space that out consistently, and then also reduce what can be a frustrating physical feeling that can lead to maybe making it a little harder to stick to this fast, right?
Yep. The number one thing you can do to ride the wave with hunger is salt supplementation, trace minerals, and or like using something like an element or an LMNT. That's going to keep balance out your electrolytes, and it's going to help you push through and ride out the hunger wave. And typically we see anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. And we'll talk about some other situations with sleep and exercise and stress where it'll get you through, but you might have another wave that comes a little bit more quickly. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But that is the number one lever that you can use to quell the hunger, so you don't get, tanked by the wave at the beach and you're on the bottom of the ocean going, right, like trying to get back up. Like if anybody's body surfed before, or you get the rogue wave that just attacks you out of nowhere. We want to
end up on my back?
Yeah, we want to ride this wave. I remember back in the day, we're in North Carolina, and we went to pick up our first dog and bring her home, and we were off the coast of North Carolina. And we're just hanging out in the water and had my sunglasses on. And all of a sudden, my wife was standing facing me. My back was to the ocean. I got smoked by one of these waves.
Oh, no.
I went down, glasses fell off, and there goes my prescription Oakley's off into the wondrous abyss. So I got hit by one of those waves. So we want to ride this wave out and minimize some of those effects. The biggest way that you can do it is by using that salt supplementation. So I like to do just, I use the Redmond salt. I use like a level cap full in some water, chug it down, and boom, my hunger goes away. But we'll talk more about the understanding of what hunger truly is, so you have an understanding of what that physiology is, and you can interpret it, as a hunger cue, not necessarily having to go and get wrecked by the wave, so to speak. So when factors that increase hunger, we're going to talk about when the stomach is empty and circulating insulin and blood glucose levels are low, such like during a period of fasting and or in between meals. The lining of the stomach secrete this hormone called ghrelin, and it also, here's a cue, it also releases it in response to food cues. So we call this the cephalic phase of hunger. So your five senses, you smell the food, you see the food, walking by your coworker's lunch. Hopefully they're not heating up fish in the microwave, but something that actually smells good, because it stimulates appetite, right? So the other one that we talk about, the factors that promote fullness and help you stop eating as ghrelin comes down, leptin, is primarily the molecule that's going to say, hey, I'm full, I'm good, I don't need any more food. This helps regulate overall appetite and metabolic rate, but it's based on your body's long-term energy needs. And it takes into account, this is where we need to take into account the amount of visceral fat specifically, but just total body fat, because leptin is primarily secreted by fat cells on a relatively consistent basis. So someone that has more body fat generally has higher circulating levels of leptin, which typically in a positive way will help downregulate those appetite and those hunger cues. However, if you've had this for a long period of time, then you're going to see that leptin resistance come into place, which you'll see chronic inflammation, chronic joint pain, elevated triglyceride levels, elevated liver enzymes. This is where we're seeing that the body isn't able to actually process the short-term energy in the form of glucose, and your liver is working overtime to try to help the body to burn that energy that you have floating around. So you get stuck in this kind of like leptin trap where you're like, yeah, I'm always hungry, or man, I can always just keep eating. I don't have like a fullness cue, so to speak.
Yeah, because think about leptin needs to go through and actually cross the blood-brain barrier, right? And actually give you signals to your central nervous system and actually trigger a neurological satiation. And so if it's not able to do that because you have leptin resistance, then that's problematic, because like you said, your fat stores are actually producing more. They're trying to communicate even more, but it's not working because you have this desensitization happening at the central nervous system level. And so that's one of the other supporting arguments to, we need to get the weight off. We need to burn through those long-term fat stores. It's not about doing it in a very slow way. It's about doing it as effectively, quickly as we can, because those fat cells, those over-stored fat stores, are actually wreaking havoc on our physiological communications. And so actually burning through those with consistent fasting and fast cycling means that we're able to balance out these hunger and satiety cues in a lot better, more efficient fashion, that then leads to actual correct interpretation of our hunger cues. Maybe even for the first time, I feel like during my first probably 3 to 4 months of consistent fasting was within that time frame that I felt like I was getting these satiety cues basically for the first time, and I'm having to like learn how to interpret these, because I had never felt those before, or it had been so many decades that I was, probably in my childhood, since I had actually, received those signals and actually been able to interpret them, which is pretty crazy as an adult to say that.
So here's the reality with fasting and the hunger reality check is, in the short term, hunger peaks when you start consistently fasting, because your body's adjusting. It's adjusting to all of the signals, the gut-brain signals that we're talking about here with leptin and ghrelin. And there's a few other really important GLP-1, cholecystokinin. I always mess up the word when I say this, but we'll just abbreviate them because it's easier. The CCK peptide, cholecystokinin. You've got PYY, peptide YY, and glucagon-like peptide. These are all influenced based on the food choices and your current leptin levels and metabolic state, because these are all things that take place in the intestines, and they respond to different macronutrients and different food choices. So that's why we're going to talk about the macronutrients and how to kind of position your food choices to help your fasting efforts be easier and counteract this hunger. Because the reality check is, with the fasting hunger reality check, is in the beginning your body needs to balance, and long-term fasting actually regulates insulin and stabilizes energy, which often reduces the hunger intensity, and you can kind of ride those shorter waves out more consistently. Because if anyone's if you've gone off the rails on the weekend and you come into Monday with the intention of doing a 24 or 36-hour fast, which we don't always recommend, because that doesn't break the cycle of the behavioral pattern of falling off the wagon on the weekends. The toughest part of doing a longer, let's say a 72-hour fast, is those first 36 to 48 hours. The first day, okay. But on that second day, that's typically where you'll see that intensification of the hunger cues. But once you break through that, they become more predictable and much weaker in intensity and duration. And we've done a study on this. We talked about it on the pod, where we looked at the fact that with consistent fasting efforts, even though your hunger hormones still remain at those elevated or normal levels, the interpretation of your body, how you're interpreting them, is much less.
Yeah, and it has to do with, go ahead.
Go ahead, no.
It has to do with shortening that transition between carbohydrate burning and fat burning. So as you get through that transition time right there, that allows you to actually more efficiently tap into your long-term fat stores, which means that now your body's energy stores have actually come up after you've burned through the last meal that you had or the last couple of meals over the weekend. Burn through those short-term stored carbohydrates in the glycogen, in the form of glycogen in the liver and the skeletal muscle. So once you've done that, then you're actually transitioning into a state of higher ketosis, where you can tap into those long-term fat stores. So that actually allows the lowering of those hunger waves, because really your body's not fighting for nutrients then at that point, so that's when some of the calm can kind of come about, where you're like, oh, okay, I got through that point, right? But when we're making food choices during the weekend or any other time, whether you feel like you're off track or not, your food choices matter, and they're going to affect those hunger cues, the levels and the intensity as you go into your next fast. So that's why they're important.
So, and the takeaway from that conversation is the more metabolically flexible you become, the more consistent with your fasting you become, the fewer hunger crashes you feel, because blood glucose and blood sugar levels and leptin levels, they balance out and they level and they become more stable. So let's talk about the food choices, and then we'll talk about lifestyle factors that can trigger or magnify hunger. And then we'll go into dopamine, and then we'll talk about practical hunger management strategies, adopting a fasting lifestyle. So when we look at the three macronutrients, we got carbs, fats, and proteins. So when we look at carbs, specifically fiber-rich carbohydrates can be a great addition to meals. So we're not anti-carbohydrate. If you're trying to reverse diabetes or you're on insulin, yes, we know that carbohydrates are the devil right now. But the reality is, long-term, the studies show that we need to reintroduce those to get the insulin sensitivity up, and they're not off limits forever. They may be off limits for right now, but when you look at carbohydrates, there's something called naked carbs, right? So these are ones that aren't paired with the blood sugar stabilizing nutrients, or carbs in like refined grains or sugars. Those are absolutely going to increase hunger and overeating, particularly if they spike your blood sugar. And for 88% of the population that's metabolically unfit, yes, you're going to see some form of blood sugar swings. This is the whole, hey, I ate Chinese food and I'm hungry, 30 minutes later, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a study in 2021 that that looked at 1,000 people wearing CGMs, or continuous glucose monitors, and they looked at how meals affected people's hunger 2 to 3 hours later, and they found that when someone's blood sugar spiked and was followed by a blood sugar dip or crash, when glucose fell below the pre-meal level, that dip predicted how hungry they would be and how long until they would eat again, and how much they would eat.
I believe it.
The bigger the dip, the hungrier they were. The sooner they ate, the more they ate. Anyone relate?
Yep.
So the meals that caused the greatest blood sugar rise led to the greatest blood sugar dips, yet then led to more consumption. So low glycemic, blood sugar friendly foods, pair your carbs with foods and habits that can blunt a spike. So that's why we always say prioritize protein first, and we'll get to protein in just a minute, because this is going to help stabilize your blood sugar. And they found in 2019, 20 people on a short-term carb-restricted diet found that people's cravings for sweets decreased dramatically. We hear this from listeners and from challengers and from our coaching clients all the time. Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm not craving that anymore. Wow, that craving's been gone. Because what that does is that helps manage that acute response to that blood sugar swing.
Yeah, and the problem with blood sugar swings is, like you said, the higher it goes, the lower it crashes, because the pancreas can't fully accurately predict exactly how much insulin that it should secrete in most cases. So then the higher it goes, the more of an overcorrection that tends to happen. And so then when that happens, you have this overcompensating dip in blood sugar that, like you said, it's lower than pre-meal levels. And that's problematic because then we find ourselves chasing the blood sugar swings and feeling these exaggerated cravings, exaggerated hunger cues, because now we're underneath that baseline level. I actually experienced this just yesterday because of caffeine, not because of food, because of caffeine and creamer in my coffee. So I actually went over to a coffee shop and had probably 2 to 3 times my normal caffeine dose. And then since I was at a coffee shop and I usually have like a splash of half and half, I'm sure they probably double what I'm normally doing. So I may have had
Right.
a
splash is a glug, glug, glug.
Yeah, right. And it tasted amazing, but I may have had quadruple the creamer in my coffee and triple the caffeine. And then all of a sudden, what is this doing? The point of the caffeine is to mobilize fuel. So, I'm having a blood sugar response. I wasn't wearing a CGM, but I wish I had been now, so I could see exactly how high that went and then how low it went later. Because to say that my hunger cues were more exaggerated than probably than I can even remember in the last 3 months, probably. So it was quite a day. I won't repeat that. I'll go back to the same coffee shop, but I'll have one instead of two, and I'll tell them to go easy on the creamer as well. So just knowing that it made that fast, or that part of the fast after that, because I didn't eat until later on in the day, but man, I wanted to break that fast earlier, and that's not something that I typically just battle with on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yep, absolutely. So we started with carbs because that's, carbs, sweet, sugars. So we know, right? If you want to read a great book, Salt, Sugar, Fat,
so good,
by Michael Moss, great read. Give you some perspective on the obesogenic food, ultra refined, ultra processed, convenient food environment that we currently live in. When we talk about fats, these are very easy to overeat, and this is why keto is tough for a lot of folks, because when fats are very easy to overeat and they're very calorically dense, because they're in a lot of highly palatable processed and fried foods, and that's going to mess with your neuropeptide hunger hormones, because it's highly pleasurable, which can lead to overconsumption. So dietary fat's also been shown, though, to slow down gastric emptying, which is going to suppress ghrelin, which is ultimately going to curb your hunger. So when we talk about macronutrients and what should my plate look like, we typically follow a 40-40-20, and you can find this in the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. It's in the show notes. You can click the link. It's a free 20-page PDF. We talk about a 40-40-20. So protein and fat first, right? Fill your plate with 5 veggies, healthy things that you want to put on your plate, real food. And then you can backload your plate with, 20% carbohydrates. Fiber-rich carbs are also great, starchy veggies, those types of things, because it's going to slow down that gastric emptying. So if we're going to build our plates, fats, they did a study in 2006, consuming fat before or with a carbohydrate-containing meal has a positive effect on satiety, right? That leptin conversation, but it also decreases your ghrelin because it slows down the emptying of your stomach. So when your stomach's empty, ghrelin, the growling hunger hormone, goes up, right? So when we make, for instance, there was a study in 2012, pancakes containing 50 grams of carbs and 220 calories that had oils and butter in it were all more satiating than the control pancakes that had no fat in it at all.
I believe
so when we
yeah.
when we do dinner for Wednesdays, and we happen to be recording this on a Wednesday, we do dinner for breakfast on Wednesday nights. We use Bob's Red Mill gluten-free pancake mix, and I add in collagen, or we make sure that we put in avocado oil and egg into it as well. So you're getting a more balanced macronutrient rather than just, letting the kids run rampant with Bisquick and drenching it in, pure sugar with maple syrup. So
sure.
We definitely use this from a real life strategy. And that leads to the conversation about fiber, in the fact that fiber-rich foods, vegetables, fruits, they may have carbohydrates in them if you're talking about, bananas or apples or grapes or those two types of things. But they also have the fiber in there. So you're not getting that just naked carbohydrate dump into the stomach. So if you're afraid of fruit, how many people do you know that got overweight and or obese and have health issues because they ate too much fruit?
Good point. Yeah. None.
It's going to help balance these hunger hormones by adding fiber into your plate. And the last one's protein, which we just prioritize protein. Protein has been shown to be more satiating in an equal amount of calories than when compared to carbs or fat.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen by accident. You have to plan ahead. It's a little more expensive. It tends to be the longest.
Needs to be cooked.
Yeah, you need to cook it. You want to prepare it. You want to prepare it in a way that you can enjoy it. And it's just one that takes a little bit of thought ahead of time. So plan ahead for your protein. And then start whenever you're making your plate, start with the protein so that you can, like the easiest way to get in more protein is probably just start with either doubling or at least, get 50% more and just put it on your plate. Because even if you don't finish it because you're not used to eating that much more, you'll tend to have less of the other stuff so that you're properly prioritizing as you kind of go through your hunger signals within that meal. And then you'll tend to get more protein and less of the other stuff, which is going to be good for your hunger signals. It's going to be good for your metabolic efficiency. It's going to be good for your next fast too, because it's going to cut down on some of those cravings and the hunger signals, the ghrelin, that as you go through that next fast. In the same way that as ketones start to rise, as you go through, one fast cycle after another, and your ketones start to rise, that actually has a natural effect of lowering ghrelin as well, just like protein and amino acids do, which is fantastic.
Yep. Simply two more talking points on food here and food choices. Solid foods versus liquid foods.
Yeah.
Right? So protein shake, smoothie, chewing and slowing down is really important. To give your body the complex hormonal signaling cascade that we talked about earlier, to give your body the time to regulate. And we teach this with our kids too. It's like, okay, yes, I want more, but is your belly telling you more? Are you still hungry? Let's just sit for a minute before you decide if you want to have another serving, right?
Am I comfortable?
Yeah. Do I feel
satisfied?
comfortable, or am I satisfied, or am I getting to that point where I'm like, ooh, I'm really pushing the envelope here. My wife is a self-proclaimed, empty legger. She just she can just keep going. Like she just loves food. And thankfully I don't. I'd be 400 pounds. I think as food more of fuel now than I do as enjoyment. We'll talk about dopamine here in just a minute, but chewing your food. So this used to happen to me when I was in clinical practice. I would wake up. I had this smoothie that I drank every morning for like 2 years. But what I realized, if I just took one to the office, I was ravenous about halfway through our morning office hours. So I would always make a double batch and bring a second one that I could sip on throughout the day because I knew that I was more hungry. So actually slowing down and if you get this with protein shakes, especially with whey protein, sometimes it can hit the stomach and cause a blood sugar swing. Getting the protein in is important, but the strategy of when to have that, like at the beginning of your nutrition opportunity or your eating window versus the end, can be a huge lever to pull in terms of quelling that hunger and just managing it from a fasting lifestyle standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The last one is the ultra-processed foods. And the reality is the world we live in, chips, cookies, sugary cereals, breads, hot dogs, mac and cheese, fries, pizza, soda. 60%, some of the studies show, of calories in the standard American diet come from those types of foods. So that's why, fasting can be the easy part after a few repetitions, and you get the motivation is high because most people come to fasting to lose weight and you're getting some momentum. But the reality is that those old habits in the world that we live in of the ultra processed food has been shown to increase the overeating potential, which is going to increase the need for more insulin, which will then drive down your blood sugar and give you more of that blood sugar roller coaster effect, which then we just talked about a few minutes ago. That's going to lead to that increased consumption. So
it's also going to block fat stores though too.
Yep.
Yeah, which is a problem.
So the rate of eating, so slowing down, because the higher, more calorically dense, high fat, higher hedonic foods, high fat, high carb foods, the ultra processed diet shows that you can increase your consumption of 17 calories per minute when compared to an unprocessed diet.
Wow.
Right? It's also going to have an effect on the hunger hormones. So we always talk about protein, prioritizing protein. You can call it protein leveraging, protein pacing, whatever. But you definitely want to start and build your plate, prioritizing that protein and healthy fats, filling it in with the healthy fruits and veggies, and then ending your meal with the carbohydrates, so you're not just having a naked carb.
So, and that means that if you spent 1 hour in a given day eating ultra processed foods, then that would be about 1,000 calorie increase right there. And that's not to mention the fact that the blood sugar and insulin response were already disproportional for those foods, and they were also increasing your ghrelin that you're going to experience during your next fast or after that meal, shortly thereafter, unfortunately, as the blood sugar overcompensates due to the extreme insulin response. So then it's going to make the next fast that much harder, and you had additional calories coming in that you end up storing those more quickly and efficiently, unfortunately, as long-term fat stores. They're going to be harder to tap into. It's going to require, another couple of fasts or another longer fast that's now that much longer to actually burn through. So
Yep.
you can see how, the occasional ultra processed food meal is not the end of the world. It's okay, but at the same time, you can see how just a few times, especially when they're in short order or they're relatively close together, they can really start causing a problem in as far as being able to see results, feel momentum, feel like your fast is actually relatively easy, right? It's making life that much harder. So then it becomes, I like to ask myself, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze, really?
Yep, absolutely. And this is all coming from the standpoint, and we'll get into the practical kind of outcomes here in just a minute, but this is the insulin resistance, metabolic health, hunger regulation connection. Is when your body can't efficiently use glucose and you have these blood sugar swings, that can trigger false hunger, right? The Chinese food example. Or for instance, we hear this from people, hey, I had a muffin for breakfast. After I broke my fast, I fasted overnight, had a muffin, but I am ravenously hungry about 90 minutes later versus having a breakfast of eggs and avocado. You're just going to manage those hunger cues. And that's why we always talk about prioritizing protein and really building your plate with that in mind. And we've talked about this many times, is managing that insulin response is the key to managing hunger. And fasting helps. It's the biggest lever that we found to improve that insulin sensitivity, post-meal insulin sensitivity, the GLP-1 conversation over time, which is why fasting, in our experience and what we've heard from thousands and thousands of folks, is when you start fasting, those hunger cues get a lot more easy to manage, and then you can ride those waves when they do hit. So you're getting a lot more consistency and ultimately what we want, which is long-term results.
Heck yeah.
So what I want to talk about now is other things that can affect your hunger levels. And these are going to be lifestyle triggers that magnify hunger. So we're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about stress and cortisol. And we're going to talk about circadian rhythm, late night eating. So the first one we're going to talk about is lack of sleep. So inefficient or insufficient sleep can rev up your appetite due to the decrease in the satiety hormone leptin, or the increase in leptin resistance, and increases ghrelin. So some studies have found that adults sleeping 5 to 6 hours per night had leptin levels up to 17% lower than what was predicted based on their body fat percentage. And sleep, because the second one we're going to talk about here is stress. Poor sleep is also a chronic stressor, and it may increase hunger due to the stress response systems, or the stress response that we're going to go over here in just a sec.
Wow. So then this is just compounding the effects right here. And this is also, remember, if we're underslept, we also are insulin resistant too. So not only do we have to contend with the actual hunger cues, but we're also, when we give into those hunger cues, or when we do break our fast, even if it's intentional, we're then having a disproportional insulin response to the food that's
AKA
coming
a blood
in.
sugar swing.
Big blood sugar swings, and locking up those long-term fat stores, because insulin's the gatekeeper of fat too. So this is why we could be counting calories, we could be counting macros, we could be doing everything right. But if we're in a chronically sleep deprived state, even if we're only at 6 hours a night, it can be enough to throw off the balance, even with good fasting or good dieting, to feel stuck, or even to see long-term slow weight gain when we should be in a caloric deficit. We should be in an opportunity to burn through fat, right?
Yep, absolutely. So before we talk about stress, I want to have the conversation about dopamine, Tommy.
Okay.
So I want you to unpack that just in terms of, because when the way we say it is HALT the BS. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stress. Or happy, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. So is it really hunger, or is it one of those other things wanting to tap into our dopamine reward system, right?
Yeah. So as we get into any sort of dopamine deficit, as we get into any time where happy or rewarding hormones are not high, they're lower in the brain, then that immediately sends a cascade of different things, actual need for fuel, actual feelings of hunger cues, and then also just the brain driving for increased dopamine levels. The brain doesn't like to be at a dopamine deficit. So then I'm feeling a certain way, and I know that one of my easiest ways to get dopamine is going to be from food or from drink. So bringing in something into the GI tract is going to be a very, very short way to get in dopamine hits. And we know that, and we should know that. It's part of how we're wired for survival and for life. And so we have to understand that when we're trying to burn through long-term fat stores, that's going to be something that we may need to contend with. So we're going to have to be ready for some of those HALT the BS times, so that the temptation in the moment during those emotional or stressful times or boredom times, boredom is a big one, especially during, as your fasts extend, you may think, I really need this longer fast. I need to burn through some long-term fat, but it might just be boring. And then, what's interesting? Having some food. That's pretty interesting. So being able to contend with actual hunger signals and then the boredom or those other emotional states is really, really important, because the dopamine system is a very powerful one. And remember back a few episodes when we talked about the reward centers in the brain and getting those recalibrated, because even a couple of days, a weekend, a trip, just a few days of kind of feeling off track or, without structure within our eating and our fasting can be enough to really lower the effectiveness substantially of those dopamine reward centers. And it can take 1 to 2 weeks for them to rebalance. So understanding what we're up against is really, really important.
So with HALT the BS in mind, when we talk about this being driven by hormones or a complex, gut brain blood sugar connection, what truly happens is your hypothalamus, your HPA axis, is your stress response axis, right? So when we're looking at this, there's two main players. There's orexin and melanin concentrating hormone, or MCH. These are secreted by the lateral hypothalamus, right? The top player in the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland axis. Adrenals make cortisol. So what will happen is they really have a direct effect on the feel-good neurotransmitter hormone. 50% of your dopamine is made in your stomach. And what happens is it opposes the natural balance. So it's going to drive highly palatable, highly satiable, highly hedonic food intake. Because dopamine plays a key role in motivation and food-seeking behavior. And that MCH molecule that I mentioned inhibits dopamine release. So it may seem counterintuitive, but the research suggests that when dopamine levels drop, or a blunting of pleasure, like that reward, that feeling, that prompts us to eat even more because of those highly palatable food choices in an attempt to restore those dopamine levels.
Yeah, quickly, very quickly.
So that's why 80% of the time, this is what we talk about most of the time, week in and week out on our Thursday coaching calls inside of coaching, is that food relationship. What are those? We try to change the action, which is the food decision, or like the eating. We try to change the eating action, but what we need to change is the cue. Why are you going to it? Why are you fueling that dopamine imbalance or allowing those naturally secreted hormones to drive that behavior? It's the cue not the action that we need to be changing to get ultimately the reward, which is riding out that hunger wave, if that makes sense.
It really does. And sometimes we go to food when it feels like we can't control something else. So,
That's why we're
right?
putting this right before we talk about stress. Yep.
100%. So controlling the controllable, and sometimes when it feels like there's just too much, or I don't have a feeling of control, I can control bringing in food right now. So just making that choice, even if it's a really poor choice or not one that's aligned with my long-term goals, I should say, like an ultra processed food that maybe I wouldn't normally have, or I didn't really want, I wasn't planning on having it. And definitely 30 minutes ago, I wasn't even thinking about it. But now all of a sudden, I'm in this stressed out state. I'm in an emotional state. And now it sounds really, really tempting. Or maybe I've already made the decision to negotiate down with myself and go ahead and take part in that with that ultra processed food, even though it's going to compound, the issue and the frustration afterwards. And so that becomes a problematic cycle that's actually harder to break that cycle than it is to actually go and just and plan ahead for the next time. So the next time it's going to happen, what could I do instead that's more aligned with my long-term goals that would then help with my dopamine levels, so I wouldn't feel as tempted or as urgent that I need to go to an ultra processed food source to restore those dopamine levels.
Yep. So let's talk about stress. So under chronic stress or acutely stressful situations, right? The conversation with your boss, the fight with your spouse, the worry of your kids, whatever it is. This has been proven that we then have a preference for those hyperpalatable foods in high sugar, high fat, right? The higher hedonic foods. One culprit is the stress-induced elevations in your glucocorticoid hormones like cortisol and that chronic activation of that HPA axis that I just mentioned. This can interfere with the normal expression of those appetite-regulating hormones that we mentioned. And it's also going to try to enhance the dopamine release in areas of the brain associated with food cravings, which then could promote overconsumption, right? Or you're like, all right, I'll just have one, but then you end up eating the whole thing type scenario. And it's definitely shown in people with obesity that they have a much more broken pathway here than in people at a healthy weight. Now, that can be completely undone with consistent fasting efforts, getting the weight off, helping balance the hunger hormones, and some of the things we're going to talk about here in just a minute is kind of a hit list of things that you can do to help control hunger. But that's when it comes to stress, is we need to mitigate that. So maybe just doing a breathing exercise or going for a walk, like separating yourself from yourself. Like, don't walk into the pantry when you're feeling like this, when you're hungry, angry, happy, lonely, bored, tired, or stressed. Do something different, because if we just remove the action, we create what's called a habit vacuum, and we can only fight that with willpower for so long.
Yeah, don't do it. You're using all the won't power you can muster.
Tell a 5-year-old not to eat on the couch or jump on the couch. What's he going to do? That's all he's going to think about.
Yeah.
Is jumping on the couch, right? So we need to think of it from that perspective, is insulating yourself from yourself when it comes to stress. So managing stress is an absolute huge component of regulating hunger. The last one is this circadian rhythm disruption. And this is just, we've changed our tune on this, where OMAD dinner was the main easiest way for people to start fasting with 1 meal a day type fasting. But we've seen a complete shift with circadian biology in mind, that shifting to an earlier eating window, breakfast and lunch, let's say if you're at maintenance and you're doing, let's say, a 4 or 6 hour window, getting in 2 full meals a day, or the OMAD breakfast or lunch versus the OMAD dinner. Late night eating shifts that ghrelin and leptin cycles out of sync even more. So we definitely want to encourage you to align your meals. If you're stuck or you're frustrated, you're not getting consistent efforts, or hunger is crushing you, eating earlier has actually been shown to decrease consumption later in the day.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, especially if you feel like you're stuck in that OMAD dinner rut, like you just mentioned, Scott, it can seem counterintuitive, but honestly, adding in an earlier meal, even if you're going to still have a dinner OMAD, like try this for a few days, add in a lunch to that dinner OMAD, or add in a breakfast, and then just
doesn't have to be a full-blown lunch. It can be a mini meal, like a small protein-based meal, right?
100%. Or do that at breakfast. Have a small breakfast, and then wait the rest of the day until dinner. and then you're going to be actually giving your body better signals, better hunger and satiety cues to actually recalibrate. Even so, the logical argument might be, yeah, but then I'm going to be bringing in more calories, and so I'm kind of negating some of my fat burning. No. We're taking the long game here. We're using the long game approach. So don't worry about the short-term temptation to just kind of shave off a few more calories if you're in a fat loss phase. Do it, and you'll be giving yourself better hunger and satiety cues. Try it out for a few days, and then go and then see. You'll probably have an easier time transitioning to or sprinkling in some OMAD lunches rather than
Right.
just trying to shift that window, because we know a lot of folks who try to go from an OMAD dinner to an OMAD lunch say, I'm just really having a hard time kind of going through that boredom late night gap, going
Right.
from, let's say, 2 o'clock all the way through to whenever I go to bed. And so sprinkling in, doing it for a few days, like a mini meal at breakfast or at lunch along with your OMAD dinner, can actually smooth the transition. So you can find
Yep.
yourself having some earlier meals, easier to close that late night window.
And it's variable for every one of us because we're all at a different journey when it comes to our weight and habits and lifestyle and stress and sleep and all that kind of stuff, right? So the last category today is exercise. So it really might seem like working out would make it harder to manage hunger because you ever done a really stressful and you just ravenous after your workout.
Yep.
But it's not always the case, specifically when you start doing fasted workouts. So it's really like a choose your own adventure here. What works better for you? So the current research suggests that a single bout of moderate to vigorous exercise suppresses feelings of hunger and the hunger hormone ghrelin, while elevating those appetite suppressing hormones that we mentioned, like a GLP-1, for instance, right? So we can get into the conversation of lactate and lactic acid. That's also a natural appetite suppressant, but those only last a few hours. So whether or not you prefer to work out fed or fasted, right, and the net benefit of a 24-hour period on muscle gain and fat loss is a net zero. So it's really a truly choose your own adventure. You just need to learn to, if you work out and then you find you're super hungry, then you might need to change your workout time if you're trying to adopt a fasting lifestyle. Why make it harder on yourself? Right?
Agreed.
My wife loves to work out about 30 minutes after she eats. I hate it. I
hate that
hate
too.
working out with a full stomach.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm
Can't do
doing
it.
like weightlifting and like actually moving some weight around.
I need at least 3
more
hours.
difficult. Yeah, I need 2 to 3 hours. It's more difficult for me. So you really just need to play with these windows because exercise can really help with your hunger cues. You just need to figure out kind of the equation that works for you. So you got to play around with your different windows and your fasting and fed versus fasting. We've done multiple conversations on that, but that's definitely something else that can help mitigate some of those hunger cues. We already talked about hydration, just making sure we don't miss anything here. That's a simple decrease in a small decrease in body hydration levels can absolutely rev up hunger cues. So that's why we always like to have elements on hand. I've got my Redmond salt. We've got our trace minerals. Those help balance your water levels and your mineral levels and electrolyte levels. Because if you start fasting, you do notice that once you lose some of the air quotes water weight and your glycogen depleted, you definitely want to make sure that you are consistently hydrating, not just drinking more water, but hydrating properly throughout the day. Because we've noticed that is the number one thing to quell a hunger spell when you're doing fasting is just that shot of salt or an element. Get out of the area, give it 10 to 15 minutes and ride out that wave.
Yeah, it's one of the most important things that comes in anytime you're breaking your fast or anytime you're bringing in food. You're getting electrolytes from the food. So our brain, our nervous system, like links the two up. So anytime we're feeling a way that is actually dehydrated or low in electrolytes, it might be a little fuzzy, a little tired, even a little woozy or lightheaded at times. Anything that comes from a short-term dehydration, we know we will feel better if we bring in food.
Yep.
However, we don't have to bring in food to feel better. And that's the part with deliberate salt supplementation on a consistent basis. We can separate those two things, get the benefit of the salt and the rehydration without having to break our fast or without having to bring in more calories, more nutrition when we're busy trying to be in a fat loss phase, burning through some of the excess nutrition we've already put on our frames, right?
Yep.
We don't have to slow down the process just to feel better and feel hydrated. We can separate those two.
So let's wrap up today's convo. I kind of just want to go through just an overview, but where we started today, was really setting the framework in terms of, is hunger a friend or a foe? We want to normalize hunger as a trainable physiological response rather than this barrier. We want to ride out the waves, right? So when we're looking at action steps, we talked about before fasting, the prep stage, satiety promoting foods, fiber, veggies, protein, healthy fats. Those are going to keep you full longer. So a breakfast of a muffin versus like Greek yogurt, almonds, and berries, or like the sugary cereal or the dessert for breakfast, as I like to call it, the package of Pop-Tarts. During fasting, so mild dehydration mimics hunger signals. So we definitely want to, I found adding water and some hydration, some electrolytes before I have my coffee, absolutely beneficial. Green tea, coffee, sparkling water also have been shown to help with appetite and hunger control, right? So make sure you ask yourself, am I hungry, bored, tired, anxious, lonely, stressed, happy? Those are going to redirect those mental hunger triggers. If we can just identify the cue of why it's happening, you're going to be much more likely in the long term to be able to rely less on willpower and make those consistent changes when it comes to your fasting windows. When you break your fast, we're going to prioritize protein, healthy fats, and backfill with a small percentage of carbohydrates. Starchy veggies, fiber-filled carbs are much better than the naked carbs that we talked about. We're going to optimize sleep. Consistent wake sleep times is the biggest thing you can do. If you're still struggling with getting more than 6 hours, because ideally we want to be up over that 7 level. We've done multiple episodes on this. We have a sleep guide on in the show notes as well. You can grab on our website. Establishing a consistent wake sleep time is one of the easiest things you can do to help your fasting efforts and, more importantly, your long-term weight loss and health goals. Managing stress, meditation, walking, journaling, box breathing, something like that to fill the dopamine gap, right? To help you manage that stress. You want to exercise smartly, right? So play around with your fasting windows and pay attention to your hunger cues. And really just start to put, like, as we wrap up, 1 or 2 of these things that resonated most with you this episode, where you're like, yeah, that's me. I got to work on that. Go pick that and just simply put together an action step or 2. And some of you might need a framework. So I didn't want to forget to mention this, is you could use the hunger-satiety scale or the hunger-fullness scale. It's a tool that you rate on the scale of 1 to 10 from starving, like you're weak, dizzy, shaky, irritable, to all the way of like painfully full, nauseous, or physically like stomach distended post-Thanksgiving nap, right? Scenario. You really want to do it for a while if you're struggling with this. And just rate it when the hunger hits. Just simply go look it up. It's called the hunger-satiety scale or the hunger-fullness scale. And just figure out where you are and then use some of the things that we talked about as actions to help quell and ride out that hunger wave. Right, Tommy?
That's a great idea, because taking a little like in the moment note of where you are can give you a little bit better like objective data, so that you're not making an emotional response to how you're feeling in that moment. And that helps you kind of build in that like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let me get kind of a rational grasp on the situation before I make an emotional decision that oftentimes ends with me eating something that I wasn't planning on eating, which would fall into the category of breaking your fast early, which we want to minimize the number of times that happens. Of course, nobody's going to be perfect, but if I can stick to most fasts most of the time and make it a little bit easier and enjoyable, I'm going to have much, much better long-term success with fast cycling. And so, and I also wanted to mention one other thing. You mentioned that happy, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed. That it's interesting to me because dopamine, you would think dopamine's higher right then. Why do I feel like that's an emotional time where I might eat? We also oftentimes cross wire celebrations with food. And so because of that, as soon as we start to feel that like happiness, sometimes it's like, ooh, how else could I celebrate with some food or drink right here, right? Which
it's very cultural. It's very like part of our society. Like, let's go celebrate.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's fun, and I love it. And I love doing that. But at the same time, if it's in the moment, if it's unplanned, especially if it was going to break your fast early, it's like be very selective with when you actually do that, or do it in a smart way. If you're going to break your fast and you're feeling positive emotions, then still be smart about how you break your fast. Start with protein, avoid the naked carbs, reduce the ultra processed foods that come behind it, and like, sure, enjoy your meal. Even like, especially if you're celebrating, that's great. But like, bring in some of your structure and guidelines so that you continue to make your fasting, your fast cycling that much easier, and controlling those leptin and ghrelin levels, right, for your next fast.
Yep, absolutely. So whatever things stuck out to you in today's episode, is it the exercise? Is it the stress? Is it the relationship with food? Is it truly hunger? Pick one of those two things. Grab the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. If you want to join the upcoming challenge, we've got one left this year coming up right before Thanksgiving, November 19th. That link is in the show notes. You can get more FAQs, details, sign up, come join us for 7 days of fasting fun. It's the last one we do this year. The next one won't be until probably late January or maybe even early February. But just want to give you the resources and the encouragement and the support that you need, Tommy. So as always, man, I truly appreciate the conversation. I feel like today is going to be a milestone episode in terms of mitigating hunger, with your fasting efforts and adopting a true fasting lifestyle. Absolutely. So thanks for the conversation as always, man, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye. So you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.